Okay. So we are recording now. So welcome to our Tuesday talk with Dirk von Schneidemesser. Great to see so many faces here. Today Dirk will talk about mobility, consumer behavior, and retailer perceptions. And before I hand over to Dirk, a few words about his background. Dirk is a research associate at the IASS in the project Co-Creation and Contemporary Policy Advice. Before joining the IASS, he earned his PhD on the communication of policy options for sustainable local transport from the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. Dirk also holds a master's degree in social sciences from the Albert Ludwigs University in Freiburg and the Flaxo, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, Flaxo, Argentina in Buenos Aires, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin. And what is really interesting, I think also, is Dirk is part of the Berlin-based initiative Changing Cities, which is responsible for the co-creation of Germany's first bicycle law passed in 2018. So there's much more to say about Dirk, but I think we should now let him talk. So Dirk, you have the floor.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And we're lucky also to have somebody else who is much more so instrumental in the creation of that law than myself in the audience. So that's great that we have such a diversity of people who came to listen today. Today we're not going to be talking actually about too much directly the mobility law, but rather an issue that's directly related to its implementation, which is now that the law exists, the sort of the fun part, the important part, the frustrating part, depends on your take on it. With, I think, relevance for Berlin, but we see these conflicts throughout Germany, throughout the German-speaking world, and indeed throughout many other parts of the world. So I think that the relevance goes far beyond. So local business is often attributed a very important voice in processes of urban change. Yeah, so specifically when we're weighing the importance of car storage, and most people call it parking, I call it car storage, against cycling infrastructure, local businesses and business associations and business actors have garnered a reputation for opposing bike lanes in favor of on-street car storage. This is a bit, from the scientific perspective, this is a bit counterintuitive because we have studies showing that local retailers and local businesses profit more from active travel infrastructure and transit. So biking, walking, bus and trains, than they do from the automobile infrastructure in an urban environment or an urban setting. The reasons for the positioning of local businesses regarding bike lanes have been attributed to, in like a few studies that are already 20 years old-ish from England, have been attributed to an inaccurate perception of the mobility behavior of their customers by the local business actors. And so we examined the mobility and spending behavior of visitors to two shopping streets in Berlin, namely Cottbusser Damm and Hermannstraße, and we compare the findings with the traders' perceptions, so the merchants, of their customers' behavior. So that's the study that I'm going to be telling you about today. That'll be the second part of my presentation. And in the first part, I'll kind of just like give some context. And hopefully this, I will stop talking alone by myself within, say, 25 minutes at the very most. I'll try to keep it less. And then we can sort of engage together and see how we can make this work. So just for the context, one of the important things or the important tasks for an urban mobility transformation is redistributing traffic space. And the street you see here, this is the Cottbusser Damm, so one of the streets upon which we carried out the study. This is, as you can see, a car-oriented street. You see cyclists who are kind of forced to weave through traffic because there's a parking lane on the right. Then there's a second lane that is basically also used for parking, which is why those cyclists have to go around the second lane of cars and weave into the third lane where the traffic actually, the traffic that is motorized actually flows. And in the middle, we see bushes and a fence, which also prohibit people from crossing the street to go say hi to a neighbor, or in this context, go and buy something at a store over there without walking all the way around. So we can see that this street is just generally very oriented towards the automobile, automobility, the automobile-dominated sort of way of life. Which, however, does not allow a lot of opportunities for spontaneous shopping adventures, which is something that local businesses arguably are interested in. And so what does it mean when we say we're interested in redistributing the traffic space for a urban mobility transition? And why is that important? Well, one thing that is that we have identified that we need to do to reduce emissions coming from cities is to change the way that we travel in and through cities, and namely stop using fossil fuels so much, and even also electrical automobiles, and use more transit, use more transportation by foot, and use more the bicycle. And so to do that, we have to make those modes of transport more attractive. And if we look here on these two diagrams or visualizations, on the top, we have what the Cottbusser Damm used to look like. So 3 traffic lanes of cars, then a sidewalk where pedestrians can be. And then sort of like the center or the change of conflict that creates this conflict that we'll be looking at. The bike lane that then replaces one of the lanes of traffic, namely the car storage, the storage of, in German is called resting traffic, der ruhende Verkehr. And so that's the type of distribution we're talking about to make cycling, but also walking and transit use more attractive, safer. So other redistributions, for example, means increasing space for pedestrians, so making sidewalks wider, making pedestrianized zones, using dedicated lanes for example, buses and bus stops, etc. These things all need space in the city. Space is a scarce commodity, and so we all have different ideas of how it should be used and what it should be used for, and that's kind of the conflict that we enter into with this research. So we've got various challenges for local businesses at the moment. You can see on the left, there's one of them, the DHL, the package delivery gentleman there is getting out of his car to deliver packages ordered on the internet by possibly from the usual suspects of internet trade, which is eroding at the customer base for local businesses. And at the same time, to do so, they're parking on a bicycle lane, which is also problematic because it diminishes the attractivity of even coming into spaces like this to do any type of shopping, or just even if you're not going shopping, to move through the city safely. And on the right side, it's another sort of issue that we have that's diminishing the attractivity of local businesses. Namely this trend that we started in the United States of putting a big store in the middle of a giant parking lot on the outskirts of town where nobody works and nobody lives, and surrounding it by a giant parking lot that is not serviced well by transit. And so basically encouraging people to drive there to do their shopping, and thus also eroding the consumer or customer base for urban and local economies, and also encouraging more use of the automobile, which then has also the negative climate impacts. And so then we actually know that in urban spaces, more people go to do their shopping by foot, by using transit, by using the bicycle. And there are a few studies showing this. This is one from Bremen 30 years ago. And by the nature of me showing you a study that's 30 years old, that also says something about sort of like the state of the data that we have about this. It's there, but it's a bit sparse. It's also oftentimes far away from home. And it's very patchy. So we have the suggestion that actually in the city, more people use the bike, go by foot, and use transit to do their shopping. But we also at the same time have this myth that circulates sort of in the heads of policy makers, of administrative officials, and also in the heads of business owners and business associations. And that's where we are kind of docking onto with our study. So here, another chart demonstrating this from this one from Munich. Just before that, the second wave of this data here that's being shown was collected. The Sendlinger Straße, or a part of the Sendlinger Straße in Munich, was pedestrianized, so cars were not allowed then to go there. And we had this big debate that we have now come to know very well. Every time something like this happens, the local business associations and local business actors say, well, but there's no way that, you know, this is going to damage our business prospects, and we won't be able to continue to have our stores and sell our products and maintain sort of our economic activities. However, we can see here that after the pedestrianization, the count of the passersby in 2019, that place that was pedestrianized was the only place that experienced an increase in pedestrians. Pedestrians are good for business because in the end, all pedestrians have to cross the sidewalk or cross the threshold of a store. And this is, to this day, mostly done by going in on your feet or in a wheelchair or with the help of a walker or something of that nature. So it's pedestrians that enter stores, unless you have a drive-in Kino or something like that, or a drive-through McDonald's. But those are also the exception. So to also illustrate sort of the acute relevance, this is a graphic created by the Initiative for a Referendum for a Carfree Berlin Center, which is a current initiative campaigning for the creation of this referendum. And they're using data from 1967 and 1970 to show that studies done then suggested that actually, for example, restaurants benefit from pedestrianization measures. This is a very common topic in the media. So this here just from last month in Die Zeit, and we see, I'll translate the part that's highlighted there. It's talking about the path to a bicycle country, or bicycle land, as it were. And the quote that I'm looking at here, it says, an important point is that the local business fears that every parking space that's transformed into something else will hurt or will make their customers stay away from their stores, and that will hurt their revenues. So that's from last month. From last week, this is an example from the United States. In the Bloomberg City Lab, they covered a study using data from Yelp, where they were showing also that, especially in these places that were that during the COVID pandemic were turned into so-called slow streets or open streets. There are various names for these. That the restaurants there profited immensely and actually gained a lot of customers. But then again, and that's the highlighted quote here, but pedestrian-friendly street redesigns often face resistance from business owners who fear that they'll lose revenue from inconvenienced drivers. And this is from 2014. It's a report from the Economic Ministry of the state of Bavaria. And it's based on a survey of business owners. And they come to the conclusion and make the recommendation. So this is actually, you could argue, a piece of policy based upon input from local business owners. And the major inputs that they have here are you have to make parking, and more parking, and make it parking attractive, and make parking and car storage easy, and all of this, right? But what we question is that are business owners really the best source of policy information input? Are their perceptions grounded in reality? Should we be acting and making policy based upon that perception? Because, and this is from 3 weeks ago in the German newspaper, the BZ, or the Berlin local newspaper, BZ. And this is just like, this is totally typical, right? The picture of a business owner with his arms crossed, and it's usually a he, the ones that the journalists find, with their arms crossed in front of their business, calling out the apocalypse when parking spots in front of their stores are transformed into something like a pedestrian zone, a bus stop, or a bicycle lane, right? And this is on the Tempelhofer Damm, which is a street in Berlin, which is incredibly similar in its urban structure, at least in many parts of it, to the Hermannstraße and the Cottbusser Damm, which are the streets that we looked at in our study. So that's just a bit for the context for you. Now we're getting to the study and the results of the study. So we designed 2 surveys, one for shoppers and one for local businesses. And we selected a 1 kilometer section of 2 streets, the Cottbusser Damm and the Hermannstraße. And for those of you who are familiar with Berlin, the Cottbusser Damm and the Hermannstraße are actually the same street. But in Germany, we like to change the names of the streets, like in the middle, because, I mean, you know, we feel like it. In this case, it is actually because there is, or coincides with the boundary of the municipal district. So the Cottbusser Damm is in Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg. The Hermannstraße is in Neukölln. And the streets exhibit a similar urban structure, with the exception of that on the Cottbusser Damm, so-called pop-up bike lane, which, by the way, we as the IASS and my project Co-Creation and Contemporary Policy Advice were also involved in sort of designing the prototype for that pop-up bike lane. That was installed on the Cottbusser Damm shortly before our research. There is a lot of debate about installing a similar one on the Hermannstraße, but it has not happened yet. So potential shoppers were intercepted at random by researchers walking up and down each side of the street. The shopper surveys were carried out on different weekdays and different times between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And a large majority of the interviewed potential shoppers stated their intention to visit shops, and about 3/4 of them had also indicated that they spent money on this visit to the street. So I will now refer to those people as shoppers. The traders, the merchants, the local retailers, they were approached in their shops, except for 9 of them who filled out online surveys because we missed them in their shops. And this was all carried out by a team of 6 researchers, including myself, in the time period between June and September 2021. The questions that were included on those in those surveys, you can see here on the slide. So we asked the traders about how they thought their customers got to the store, how far their customers had to go to get to the store, and how they themselves get to the store. And we asked the shoppers why they came to the store, their own transport mode, so how they got there, the distance that they traveled to get to the store, and how much money they spent on the store, on that visit to the street, as well as the frequency of the visits to the shopping street per week. So this chart here is kind of like the essence and like the main thing that maybe like I want to show you, that shows sort of like the main results of our study. And that it shows that the traders substantially misjudge customer travel modes. They underestimate active modes. So they underestimate transit, bicycle, and foot, and they overestimate automobile use. While only 6.6% of shoppers travel to the street by car, on average, the traders estimated that 21.6% of customers use that mode. This is a discrepancy of 15%, as you can see here on this chart. And that's kind of like the main, or like one of the main takeaways that we can have here. These fears are not that the traders had. However legitimate the fears may be, they're not necessarily reflecting the reality of the situation of how shoppers travel to these shopping streets. So to explain that, so this table here explains that, and this table shows that the trader estimates of shopper transport behavior according to the trader's own transport mode. So if we are like, so we basically, it indicates that the transport mode of the traders positively influences their estimate of the proportion of customers who come using the same mode, right? So this is basically this can be referred to as the consensus bias. So assuming that the way that you do something is the way that other people also do something, right? So traders, for example, who drive to their business in a car, estimated a much higher customer car use. And we can see sort of these boxes that we've highlighted here in yellow that kind of go diagonally across the lower part of the chart. That's where the trader estimation coincides with the traders estimating use of that mode coincides with traders who actually use that mode of transport. So with the exception of transit, traders who use a car, who use a bicycle, and who go to their businesses by foot overestimated those modes. And in transit, they underestimated a little bit, but also not by much. So this just kind of confirms this idea of the consensus bias, that traders have this idea that other people travel the way that they do. And if we look at the number of traders who travel to their own shops by car, it's much, much higher than the amount of shoppers. So we're looking at 42% of the traders who reach their business by car, which makes sense. As a trader, possibly you always have to be bringing things to and from your business, right? So, you know, that is also understandable, but it also affects their perception and also is probably a basis for their engagement in political debates in the way that we observe it. So this one also, traders were found to overestimate the distance customers travel to visit their businesses. So we can see the blue parts, yeah, are the parts showing on the trader perception and on the reported shopper behavior, how far away the people live from the shop. So the traders perceived that just over 10% of their customers live within a kilometer, whereas our shoppers reported, more than half of them reported living within 1 kilometer of the shopping street, right? So this basically just tells us that a lot of business is hyper-local, right? People live so close to these businesses that there's, you know, in a lot of situations, they don't feel the need to bring you know, like motors or even non-motorized transport infrastructure into the equation. A simple pair of shoes works. Then if we look here, and this is sort of the last piece of data that I will flash at you today, so you can relax a bit. We're not going to do this forever. Shoppers were also asked how much they had spent on that visit to the street by the moment that we interviewed them. So we said, how much have you spent thus far? Because we didn't want to start having people estimate how much they will probably spend, because then we also get into certain other problems about how realistic that is, etc. So the real spending is likely higher on average than is reflected here in our data. But on average, shoppers who arrived by car spent 23 euros, while cyclists and pedestrians spent about 12 euros or each. And the thing is, though, that the drivers, although they spent more, they come less and they visit less, and thus, because they visit less and there are so few of them, they actually represent just about 6.5% of the reported spending on the street. Yeah. So to do this estimation of the relative revenue contribution by transport mode, we calculated a weekly spend based on the reported frequency of the visit to the street and the mode that was reported. And so this assumes that spending behavior will on average be replicated at each visit to the street. For the spans that we had like 0 to 10 euros, so on and so forth. We always use the midpoint values. And for the category of 100 euros or more spend, we used the number of 125 euros as an assumption for the answers. And so the results show that basically, again, automobile drivers are responsible for the lowest proportion of revenue, right, at about 9% in total, compared to pedestrians, who are responsible for like more than 60%. And transit users and cyclists are at like 13 to 16, 17%. And so despite spending less per visit, people who go by transit by car, who go by transit, by bicycle, and by foot are actually responsible for a large majority of the total revenue, over 90% of it on these streets. So where do we go from here? What I first want you to take away, like the main things that I want to kind of, my takeaway messages for you guys are that a large majority of shoppers use sustainable modes. So they walk, they use transit, or they go by the bicycle to do their shopping. Local business actors overestimate car use among customers. And shopping is super local. in many cases, people live incredibly close to the shops that they go to in urban areas. So what's next? We have to make this sort of useful, we have to make sure that political administrative decision makers are aware of this. We have to, and this is where it gets fun, working together with local business actors to sort of have, like, maybe go through a process of a collective critical reflection of our positions. And maybe this data can help sort of in something like a workshop series, maybe with like the business associations, for example, can help sort of revise and renew the positioning of these actors in these debates, right? Because that can actually help sort of quash or eliminate these sources of opposition to sustainable transport infrastructure, which actually usually take up a lot of time and a lot of energy on the parts of officials. And for political and administrative actors, if we can also make them aware of this, it can be helpful because they can, you know, better sort of judge how to deal with, or what importance to give these positions by the business actors, and say, okay, well, probably it's not like the apocalypse is not coming as quickly due to this measure as you're suggesting. So let's go through with the transformation, and within 6 months or a year or something, everything might just be then not as bad as we thought. So with that, I will stop. I see that Manuel has already has a question, but I will give it back to you, Aneta, to, I don't know if you want to moderate the questions or what have you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dirk. Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much. And we will open for discussion. And I also saw that Manuel was already the first one who raised his hand. And then I have seen, I don't know, it changed already, but someone else was also raising the hand. I would try to keep the same, Reihenfolge. I can remember the English word for that, but okay, we just start with Manuel, and then we will see. I have David also.
Thanks, Aneta, and thanks, Dirk, for the interesting presentation. I got two small questions on method, and one remark on the content. The question of method is, how did you actually, because you said you intercepted the shoppers at random, how did you control for selection bias by the researchers? Did you give yourself, I will intercept every 5th or every 6th, or, I mean, because there is always this question that when you do not this at random, really controlled at random, that you select people that you like, for instance, younger people, the same as yours. Second question is, how did you, what was the question you asked the traders about their estimates of how many people came by car and so on? Because the question about the question is important, I think, because if you ask them like about rough estimates, I mean, how should they even know? So it's kind of obvious that you would kind of get their worldview and not realistic data, and also comparing these rough estimates to concrete, really solid data you got from individuals about their individual actual travel is a bit weird. I mean, it's not you aggregated data and comparing them to these individualized data. So these are the two questions, and the remark is on the result of the euro spent. I don't know if you know whether, if not, you should be aware that there is a similar study made by the Fachhochschule Erfurt 2 years ago, which came exactly to the same results in like 15 German cities. So that does not devalue your data, but it's important that you should link up to that consciously.
All right. Should I respond directly? Yeah. Yeah, great. As far as the Erfurt study goes, that is actually something that somebody had mentioned to me, and I was never able to get my hands on that study yet.
I sent you the link in the chat, okay?
Lovely, yeah, that would be great. There's also one from Osnabrück that the Stadtwerke Osnabrück did, which I also have like terrorized everybody at those Stadtwerke, and they have not sent me the study. Theoretically, there are some more studies like this that I have not been able to get, so that's definitely helpful. So and if there are any more, that you know, send them along. As far as the random interception goes, having also participated in the surveying itself, I do know that it is hard. It's hard to maintain the randomness. So the instructions were, and we practiced this together at the beginning of the period where we were gathering the data, is that we started at a point on those streets, and we go down one way and up the other way until we come back to the point. And we always noted like where we were actually having this in sort of like quadrants where we were having these conversations. And what we were supposed to do was walk past 5 people after having completed the former, what do you call it, interview. And then ask them the 5th person that we encountered. Now, there are some serious like practical difficulties there, because the 5th person, you know, like is on the phone and is like, doesn't even like respond. So then, you know, we tried to go to the 6th, but they might not want to participate, and we try to go to the 6th. So yes, it is not perfect, but that was sort of like the thing that we tried to, the method that we tried to stick to. And we chose approaching the people on the pavement or on the sidewalk, depending on where you're from, how you call it, because whether you're going with the bicycle, with transit, as a pedestrian, or by car, you have to cross that space in order to enter the store. Then the trader estimates. So we asked the traders, we said, okay, and this was one of the sort of more challenging exercises that we did with the traders, because we said, okay, how do your shoppers get here? And then we explained, okay, there are, you know, modes, and we suggested bicycle, transit, like by foot and by car. If they were not arriving at that themselves. And we also then said, okay, let's make it in proportions of percent adding up to 100%. So sometimes there was a process of working, like if they said, you know, half with car, half with the bike, and we're like, oh, and so nobody comes with transit. They're like, oh yeah, half with transit. And then so we're like, okay, so now we're at 150%. So would that be like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or how, you know, how would you distribute this this within the bounds of 100%? And so that's the type of conversation that we then had with them. And the last question, I think it was referring to the comparison of those estimates with people's reported behavior. I'm not sure I got exactly what you were meaning, but I mean, I didn't see like a better way of being able to compare the estimates of the business representatives with the actual mode choices reported by the interviewees that we got with from the passersby.
Okay. Okay, I had Julia on my list now, and then David.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dirk, for this presentation. It was very interesting. And I don't know if I've missed it, but can you tell me again the total number of shop owners you were interviewing, and also the total number of people who went shopping? And then I'm also curious if you have already confronted the shop owners with your results, or if you're going to do so. So I would be curious what they say about it when you show them the results, that most of the people don't come by car and that they don't spend that much money.
Yeah. Yeah, so the numbers were, we interviewed 145 business owners, business managers, representatives from the businesses, and 2021 passers-by or shoppers. Those we then further divided from the Hermannstrasse and the Cottbusser Damm, but the data that I showed you today was an aggregation of all of that. Because eventually we want to also look at differences between those two places and see if there are explanations for differences between there. They're not super different. There are small differences, but it's not huge. We have not yet, we actually just kind of finished this initial analysis, or like of the data. And we have not yet confronted the shoppers, but with the district mayor of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, we have already talked about doing workshops with the local business representatives, because she is also very much aware of these debates that are kicked off every time car storage is supposed to be replaced with bike lanes, which is something that she also has on the agenda. We've spoken about it with certain business associations, like the VBKI is also interested in participating in those. Frank Mazurat is also involved not only in the ADFC, but also in this Chamber of Commerce here in Berlin. So I'm also happy that he's here, and that was also kind of one of my motivations. So we're trying to get at these people who can also help us kind of bring these results into the business associations, and maybe help us in this process of confronting the business actors with those numbers.
Finished? Okay,
yes.
Great. David?
I have a question of clarification, and then I'll have a question based on that. When was this data collected?
This data was collected from June 2021 to September 2021.
But those dates haven't happened yet, right?
Oh,
2020?
2020. Yeah.
So, actually, I did time machine research. It's great.
I'm working on collecting future data, but I haven't perfected it yet.
So it was collected during the pandemic.
Yes.
Right? So I don't know if you want to comment about how your intercept surveys went based on that. I don't know exactly what the conditions were like. But then also, I wonder in terms of like the shopper distance data, and whether you think the pandemic situation came into play with that. I know in the United States, where I'm from, so many people were working at home that their sphere of activity shrank very much to those areas around home. And what do you think about the generalizability of the data you collected for going forward in terms of the sort of the localism of the shopping?
Yeah, so I mean, that is an issue, and I think with any research that we're looking at from this period. And we did think about like, oh, can we really do this now? What's going on? We did jettison actually some other aspects that we were going to look at because it wasn't going to work. Looking back, while the transport behavior was still slightly affected at that point, in another paper that we're writing with Sophia and Sean and Katharina and Erica, we have been able, we've looked at data basically that just looks at mobility behavior over the course of the pandemic at large. And by that point, the numbers were so low and sort of like this initial like huge dive in mobility that we experienced at the beginning of the pandemic. So starting, you know, I mean, really like March was kind of like the really low point. And it didn't get completely back to normal, but it was pretty close to back to normal by the time June came around. And that was also one reason that we didn't start until June. So yeah, not perfect, something that we should definitely consider, but based upon like the general data about mobility, I think it still is yeah, generalizable to some extent, of course, with that note of this was a situation, and here's more info on that.
Okay, thank you. Angela, would you like to ask your question yourself? You have written it in the chat.
You can read it with a bit. Yeah, I can do. I just have to find it. It is, the question I have is, what can we as individuals do to use the findings of your study, make the transformation in our urban places happen? I hope you like this question.
It is a great question. Mobility, I mean, transformations of mobility infrastructure in Germany, in many places, are local issues. That means they're decided and carried out locally. In Germany, sort of like the federal government sets the general sort of like path by deciding on, you know, what's possible and what money is going to be made available for certain projects. But the local authorities have to decide on all of these things. So when you're involved in, or when you see potential changes or changes being suggested on your doorstep, and you see maybe participation, like calls for participation meetings, then, you know, take this knowledge and go there and talk about it. You can send emails and letters or call your local representatives and tell them about this and say, look, you're probably, you know, you might be, you know, receiving this position from local business actors. The data shows that that's actually maybe not such an, so grounded in reality, or that the apocalypse is not so near as they're saying. So it's good to know for your decision. And so basically to use it to help local decision makers take this kind of leap where they're of course worried when they're like, we're going to build a bike lane. And then, you know, they get like 5 business owners out there like shaking their fists. That makes them hesitant, and that makes them hesitate. And, you know, we already have the law to do this. And so what we need to do is to make sort of the local decision makers more confident in carrying out that law. And that's, I think, where this can come in.
Okay, thanks. I think Louisa also has a very similar question. Louisa, would you like to ask a question yourself too? Or should I read it?
Yeah, I can do. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Dirk, for the very interesting presentation. Yeah, is in this direction my question. So I was curious exactly to understand better, how do you intend to engage these politicians, and I mean some strategies that you could use, because I suppose that this is a very difficult part of the process. So I'd like to know your ideas. You mentioned it in the what is next section, so that's why I'm curious to know about.
Yeah, so that's, I think, I mean, that's actually the motivation for the study. I mean, the study, I was, you know, roughly expecting these results, and I wouldn't have had to do it to find that out. But what's interesting then is what we can do with it. Because, for example, in our project, we've also, you know, studied, for example, a series of workshops that I found very inspirational of mayors in Austria who were worried about taking on migrants, like in 2016. And they then did a series of workshops with mayors who had experiences taking on migrants. And hearing sort of like some of this reassurance or some of these positive messages saying like, you know, actually this was helpful for our community in this way, this way, this way, from a fellow mayor was so much more important than, you know, like you had the scientists going there and you had the policymakers going there and saying, look, guys, you know, this can be beneficial. You know, we can steer it in these directions. But the uncertainty was there, and I think it is just a huge, it's a huge difference if, you know, like we can start this reflection process with the representatives from local business themselves and also the local business associations. Germany is very corporatist, so there's lots of clubs and associations that also can be helpful in putting together this type of a workshop. And so that's the direction that we hope to go to kind of like, yeah, to kind of, you know, try and eat and digest this, this information together and see what comes of that.
Thank you. We have, I think, 6 to 8 minutes left, and 4 other people would like to ask a question. So I have Shri on my list now. Shri, would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Dirk, for very nice presentations. As a small query regarding, so while you have calculated this weekly spending, right? So have you included this, I mean, cost for this travel? For example, if you incorporate cost for travel, I mean, it might give a prospection to the potential consumer that by using car, they are spending more to get the same service. Maybe they will change their mind. Sometimes, basically, I mean, generally people expect that, I mean, they might think that they won't get every commodity in the nearby store. So they go for the big store, right? I mean, while doing that, they might be spending more. So maybe if you can, I mean, do those kind of, I mean, additional analysis, that could be also give some message to the consumer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, so that's not something that we have in this study. So we asked people only how much they had spent at the stores, not on their travel, so not buying tickets for the transit, not on the gas for their car, not for their sneakers or the repairs for their bikes. And I think that is definitely another important element. If you look at sort of like also how much transport costs, a lot of us in Germany who own cars, you know, spend 2 hours of our working day financing our transport to and from work, right? And so I think that's another super important and interesting piece of this puzzle, but it's not something that we addressed in this particular research. But I think it would be good to kind of combine it down the road for sure.
Thank you. Now I have Anke, then Frank and Manuel. So Anke, would you like to start?
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I was curious whether you erfassen, I don't know it in German, English, sorry, the type of shop on the Cottbuser Damm. So I'm more of a provocative question. Aren't there a lot of grocery stores where anyways, again, provocative, often female people go and do their shopping? Mm-hmm. And then also a question whether you consider gender aspects in your study. Or...
Very good questions. We unfortunately did not consider gender aspects. We possibly should have, but there are, of course, then lots of things that we possibly should have considered. We did, however, because it was something that did not involve making the interviews longer, we kept them very short to make sure that we could complete as many of them as possible. That was just a very pragmatic reasoning there. And we did note what type of store it is. So we have different categories for, you know, if it's a cafe or a restaurant, or if it's a bakery, or if it's a grocery store, or what have you. But I haven't sorted through that yet to see like what effects that has, and if, you know, certain types of stores estimate, you know, their consumers' mobility in different ways. That we have not gotten to yet. But I think very good point, and I do also regret a bit not having done the gender thing. But maybe next time, or maybe we can get you or Jana or somebody in a next study to also address that.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Would you like?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Dirk, for this amazing presentation and valuable information for the survey. It is very valuable because it somehow underlines former studies I have been heard about it. The main point, if I look at the questions we raised, what to do with this, the main point from my experience after talking to politicians, after talking to shop owners, is that nobody believes this. So this is the main point. So looking at this, the next step could be to do some very good, fancy, sexy marketing about that. So this is, we have to, yeah, definitely not only figures, but to bring this to public. And we maybe later on today or tomorrow, we could talk about to bring it to the Industry and Handelskammer here in other companies. And I think the main point is to do marketing about that. Yeah. So that's not a question, it's more a remark because you raised the question there.
Yeah. No, thanks, thanks, Frank. And that was also my hope that I can hook you for thinking about with me that how to bring it to the Chamber of Commerce. So that's wonderful. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And that's one thing, you know, that I thought, okay, I'm interested in the mobility transition in Berlin. And a lot of the responses that I get when I bring other studies is they're like, wow, but they're different. The people in Osnabrück or the people in Spain or whatever are different. I'm like, all right, let's get closer to home, right? And so, you know, like just to, you know, to have a bit more relevance for them and had to give them a bit less room to wiggle out. But of course, I think that will be, like you say, a major challenge, getting people to believe it. And I think maybe a good approach would be just to, like, you know, somehow begin this engagement with it and say, hey, let's look at this together, rather than like, here, take this, you know, and like hit them on the head with it. But also, you know, doing things like, I can imagine, you know, hanging up banners on the Cottbusser Damm in the middle where people can't go anyway, just like with this information, like this many people come by this, or things like that. And those are some things that I'd also like to talk about then. I mean, that would be then the purview of the city administration. But maybe we can get them on board for things like that.
Thank you. Then Manuel?
I wanted to come back to the point of the comparison of the estimates. And I think there is a bigger point. What I would say that while I find your data about the spending both useful and interesting, I'm not so sure about whether I find the data about the traders' distorted estimates. I find them useful, extremely useful, but I'm not sure I find them interesting, because of course they had just you had better information than that. So of course they didn't ask every customer how did you come. So it's obvious that they would not get it right. So of course, not getting it right, so that's scattered observations they make over the course of their day and week and so on. And then they make a rough estimate when they are forced to make one. And of course, it's a bit distorted by their own. I mean, maybe it would be more interesting to compare actually variables that could influence apart from their own travel behavior. So are there other variables like party affiliation or voting or ideological factors that also influence that? But to just say they have a bias is kind of trivial, because they did not have a comparably good information that could be distorted by that bias. So while I would say in the public sphere that's useful as an argument, I do not see that I found it surprising in any kind, because it's not like they were in a totally other ballpark with their estimates. They were more or less surprisingly right, you could say.
Yeah.
So it's a bit there. I see a bit a rhetorical element of the study that I do not see like from a social science aspect so much founded.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not, there's like, in that sense, there's not, it's not interesting at all in the scientific sense. I completely agree with you. And I'm not trying, you know, like the goal is also not to be like, hey, traders, you guys are pretty good, but not that good at estimating how your customers travel. I think where it becomes interesting is when we say, hey, look, city councilor, you are confronted now with opposition by this group against this measure. They might be coming from this place that we've documented. And so, you know, to make you feel more confident, you know, following through with this decision, I've got some evidence here for you that, you know, can explain why you might be confronted with this evidence, with this opposition, and why this opposition also might evaporate very quickly. Right. And so, and that, I think that is for me, the interesting or useful or whatever aspect. But yeah, I mean, it's not like I don't know, I've not like created or created some new theory here or anything like that. That's true. It's very pragmatically oriented.
Thank you very much. I have maybe hopefully a last question. I was wondering if you think that you can really apply this to different parts or shopping areas in Berlin, because I was just wondering and thinking of Kudamm, for example, or like Tauentzienstraße, where you have really completely different shop infrastructures. Like Anke said, that in where you made your survey, it was like a daily business. It's more like groceries and low price products. And I think that like for like Kudamm, there, the people that are going for shopping there, they really have completely different distance. All the people from the suburbs, and I even know people from Poland are coming over to go for shopping there. So do you think that you can really apply all those arguments also to different shopping areas like this?
Short answer, yes. Of course, there are caveats. Of course, there will be like slightly different behavior on the Kudamm, but in, you know, like in the very like sort of in the end of it, I mean, for example, on the Cottbusser Damm, that entire 1 kilometer section of it, there's 200, including illegal options, there's 200 spaces for cars to be put, yeah, before the bike lane came. And on the Kudamm, they've got the middle where you can also store your car. But I mean, you know, if we're like, we need hundreds and hundreds of people entering and exiting our shops each day, it's just simply not possible that that everybody's driving there with their car. Because it's this imagination we have that's how shopping works. And that's kind of like what this is, you know, well, let's think about this and let's debunk this myth that we're working on. I think it would be slightly different on the Kudamm. There are different things, like, for example, parking garages, private parking garages where you have to pay for parking in Charlottenburg are much, much more full than they are in other parts of Berlin. But I think there will always be sort of like these little differences. And I think that, you know, like having done something like this, now we can quite easily, you know, say, I don't know, somebody for their master's project wants to say, oh, but is this similar on Kudamm? You know, now maybe I can say, hey, you know, I've got a methodology and sort of a structure and like a broader project where you can, you know, have a look at that. And that type of further research, I think, would be very cool. Which, however, if the incubator didn't let me carry out this work, would be just like less interesting on its own. And so it's kind of like, you know, we start somewhere, I guess. And so in that sense, I think it's generalizable, but all to other parts with, of course, caveats. And it also serves as a basis. I mean, for example, I had spoken with Jana, who is also listening. She's the professor for bicycle traffic in Ostfalia, and I'm trying to convince her maybe to do some of this type of research in a smaller town, so that we can eventually, if I can get enough people interested, we can have like very robust data on this and just hopefully debunk this myth once and for all. So there's still a lot of convincing that happens. Having done this study is just the beginning, because now it's about talking to people and seeing what we can do with it, right?
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And thank you for all the contributions and the great discussion. And I think we will be closing for now. We're like 9 minutes past 3.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming and for listening and for also engaging and also for the ideas and the feedback. Because like I say, this is just, this is a starting point.
Thank you very much and see you hopefully next week.
All right.
Bye.